Unaware she was pregnant with twins and about to inherit a fortune, he divorced the Duchess. The bells of Thornvale rang that morning, not for celebration, but for scandal. Inside the grand marble hall, beneath banners of gold and crimson, Duke Alaric Thornvale stood before his wife, Duchess Isolde of Ravenshire, and pronounced words that echoed like a sentence. "It is over, Isolde. I will not chain myself to a woman whose name brings whispers and pity. The court mocks me for your silence, your failures, your frailty." He said it coldly, though his hands trembled behind his back. Isolde, pale but composed, met his gaze without flinching. "My silence, Alaric, was not weakness. It was loyalty." Her voice was calm, but beneath it trembled something fierce. Around them, courtiers whispered, hungry for spectacle. The Duchess's family had long been envied for their lineage, and feared for their wealth. Her late mother, Marchesa Lysandra of Ravenshire, had been one of the richest women in the realm. And now, with her gone, that fortune was soon to pass to Isolde. But Alaric knew nothing of this. He believed her fragile, dependent, unfit for the ruthless circles of court. And Lady Celine Vera, the woman standing in the shadows behind him, had done everything to feed that belief, with her tears, her smiles, her whispers in his ear. Celine stepped forward now, her crimson gown shimmering under the morning light. She placed a delicate hand on Alaric's arm. "Do not waste your mercy, my lord. She has had years to make you proud. Instead, she made you the subject of gossip." A murmur rippled through the court. Isolde turned to her, eyes like glass. "You mistake pride for poison, my lady. Be careful how much of it you drink." But Alaric had already made his decision. His pride demanded it. His ambition required it. "From this day forth," he declared, "you are no longer Duchess of Thornvale. I release you from this house, this name, and any claim to my fortune. Guards, see that she leaves by nightfall." The court gasped. Celine smiled. Isolde stood in silence, her posture regal even as her world collapsed. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of generations. "You cannot release me from what heaven has bound, Alaric. But one day, you will understand that love is not weakness, and betrayal is not strength." Then she turned and walked away, her veil trailing behind her like a ghost of what once was. Outside, the winter wind cut through her cloak. She climbed into a modest carriage, leaving behind the castle that had been her prison. The driver, her mother's old steward, waited quietly for instruction. "To Ravenshire," she said softly. The journey was long, and the road unforgiving. But Isolde did not weep. She rested her hand over her stomach, where a faint life stirred. One heartbeat, then another. Twins. When the physician had confirmed it, she had been too afraid to tell Alaric. Too afraid he'd see it as weakness, or worse, an inconvenience. But now, as the snow fell against the window, she understood. These children were not a curse. They were the beginning of something greater. At the edge of the Thornvale borders, her carriage stopped at the old Ravenshire estate, her childhood home, long empty since her mother's passing. The gates creaked open to welcome her, and as she crossed the threshold, the silence embraced her like an old friend. Her mother's portrait hung in the great hall, serene and knowing. Beneath it, a letter waited, sealed in black wax with the mark of the Marchesa Lysandra. With trembling hands, Isolde broke the seal. The words within changed everything. "My dearest Isolde, by the time you read this, I will have joined your father in rest. All that I built, all that I guarded, now belongs to you. You are heir not only to my estate, but to the fortune of Ravenshire, its lands, its fleets, its gold. Use them well, and remember, strength often wears the face of sorrow before it learns to smile again." Tears fell onto the parchment. Outside, the wind howled. But within her heart, something shifted. The woman Alaric had cast aside was gone. In her place stood the daughter of a Marchesa, and the mother of the rightful heirs of Thornvale. The days after the separation were cruel, but the silence that once haunted Duchess Isolde now became her strength. The Ravenshire estate, cold and forgotten, slowly came back to life under her care. She ordered fires lit in every hearth, servants rehired, and rooms reopened to the sound of her voice. The court whispered that she had gone mad, that she wandered the halls of her mother's house mourning the title she lost. But they were wrong. Isolde was not mourning. She was planning. Her mother's fortune was vast, greater than Alaric could ever have imagined. Mines in the western mountains, trade routes across the seas, and entire villages that swore loyalty to the Ravenshire name. For generations, her family had managed their wealth in secret, far from the greed of dukes and kings. Now that legacy was hers. Still, the weight of her secret pressed upon her more heavily than gold. Every night, as she lay in bed, she felt her children stir, two small lives moving beneath her heart. She spoke to them softly, her voice filled with warmth that no betrayal could erase. "You will never know the kind of loneliness I knew," she whispered. "You will grow strong. You will carry our name with pride. And one day, the world will remember who your mother was." Months passed. Her belly grew, and with it, her resolve. She oversaw the restoration of the estate personally, walking the halls even when her steps became slow and unsteady. Her steward begged her to rest, but Isolde refused. "Ravenshire will not rise again from pity," she said. "It will rise because I will it to." Then, one night in the depths of winter, the pains began. The midwives rushed to her chambers, the fire blazing high to ward off the cold. Outside, the snow fell in silence. Inside, Isolde labored for hours, her cries muffled by the wind. When the dawn finally broke, the air filled with the first wails of two infants, a boy and a girl, her children, her heirs, her redemption. She named them Rowan and Seraphina. As she cradled them in her arms, a warmth spread through her chest, unlike anything she had ever known. The world had taken her pride, her title, and her husband, but it had given her something far greater. Meanwhile, back in Thornvale, Duke Alaric's new marriage had begun to rot from within. Lady Celine Vera, now the Duchess by name, ruled not with grace, but with greed. The halls that once echoed with music and light now rang with her laughter, sharp, hollow, and cruel. Servants whispered that she spent more gold in a month than Isolde had in a year. At first, Alaric ignored the rumors. He was too consumed with proving to the court that he had made the right choice. He flaunted Celine at every banquet, drowning his doubts in wine and applause. But the admiration was short-lived. Within months, debts began to mount. Celine's extravagance bled the treasury dry. The merchants who once trusted the Thornvale name turned away, citing late payments and broken promises. Then came the letter, from Ravenshire. It bore the seal of the Marchesa Lysandra, the same mark Isolde had once used when signing official papers. Alaric frowned as he broke it open. "To the House of Thornvale. Effective immediately, all trade privileges once extended to your lands by the House of Ravenshire are revoked. All debts owed shall be recalled. Failure to comply will result in seizure of assets." Alaric read it twice, his hand trembling. "What nonsense is this?" Celine snapped, snatching the letter from him. "The Marchesa is dead." He stared at the seal again, crimson wax, pressed with perfect precision. Then, it seems her daughter isn't. For the first time in months, Alaric felt something unfamiliar. Dread. Back in Ravenshire, Isolde watched her messenger depart with calm satisfaction. She did not seek revenge, only justice. The man who had cast her aside would finally see that the woman he dismissed as weak had inherited not only her mother's wealth, but her power. Holding her children close, she whispered, "The Duke of Thornvale will learn that everything he abandoned was worth more than everything he ever chased." Outside, the snow fell softly, covering the roads that led to Thornvale, roads that one day, she knew, he would travel again. The letter from Ravenshire was the beginning of the end. Within a fortnight, Duke Alaric Thornvale's name, once synonymous with prestige, became the subject of laughter and whispers. Merchants withdrew their credit, and courtiers who once bowed before him began to turn away. Every debt collector seemed to carry the same seal: Ravenshire. Lady Celine's temper flared with each passing day. "You're letting her humiliate you," she hissed, pacing their lavish chambers. "She's manipulating you from afar, flaunting her fortune to make you crawl." Alaric stared into the fire, its light reflecting the ruin he refused to name. "She doesn't need to flaunt anything," he muttered. "Everything she touches turns to gold, and everything I touch burns." Celine threw her goblet against the wall, wine staining the silks. "You were supposed to be greater with me. You promised me the world, and all I have now are creditors and rumors." "You wanted the crown without the burden," he snapped, rising to his feet. "You wanted a title, not a husband." Her eyes narrowed. "And you wanted admiration, not love." The words hit deeper than she knew. That night, unable to sleep, Alaric rode to the old Thornvale chapel, a place he had not entered since his wedding. Dust coated the pews. The air smelled of wax and abandonment. He knelt before the altar and whispered, "What have I done?" No answer came, only the creak of the wooden beams as the wind howled outside. Meanwhile, in Ravenshire, Isolde's life had blossomed into something beyond her imagining. The once empty estate now bustled with workers, trade envoys, and scholars. Under her leadership, the House of Ravenshire became the beating heart of commerce across the kingdom. Her mother's fortune had grown tenfold. Ships under her banner carried spices, fabrics, and silver to distant lands. But her greatest joy remained her children. Rowan, bold and curious, shadowed the steward everywhere, insisting on learning how every coin and trade was managed. Seraphina, quiet and perceptive, loved music and books, often sitting in her mother's study while Isolde worked. "They have your mind," said her old nursemaid one evening, watching them play. Isolde smiled softly. "Then may they use it more wisely than their father did." Yet sometimes, in the solitude of night, she wondered if Alaric ever thought of her, or of them. The hurt no longer consumed her, but it lingered, like the ache of an old scar. 2 years later, Alaric's decline was complete. Thornvale's debts were public. His name, once gilded, now dripped with shame. Desperate, he sought one final chance to salvage his title. Rumor had reached him that the Marquess of Westmere was seeking allies, and that his chief investor was none other than the mysterious Lady of Ravenshire. He rode to the capital, half mad with exhaustion and pride, determined to meet her face to face. He imagined her old, bitter, perhaps clinging to her riches in loneliness. He would humble himself, perhaps even beg forgiveness, if only to save what remained of his house. But when he entered the royal hall that night, he stopped cold. There, beneath chandeliers of crystal and gold, stood Lady Isolde of Ravenshire, radiant in a gown of deep emerald velvet, her hair crowned in silver filigree. Her children, his children, stood beside her, dressed in fine garments, bearing the unmistakable Thornvale eyes. The crowd parted around her as she spoke with the king's treasurer, her tone steady and confident. She was no longer a duchess abandoned. She was a woman of legend. Alaric's breath caught in his throat. For years he had imagined her broken, forgotten, or dead. But she had become everything he had claimed he wanted: respected, admired, untouchable. When her gaze finally found his across the room, time itself seemed to falter. Isolde's lips curved into something between a smile and a warning. Then she turned away, continuing her conversation as though the man who had ruined her life was no more than a stranger in the crowd. Celine, who stood beside him, saw it too. Her hand tightened around his arm, her voice dripping venom. "So that's the ghost that haunts you." Alaric's answer was barely a whisper. "Not a ghost, a queen reborn." The next morning, the palace still hummed with the echoes of gossip. Lady Isolde of Ravenshire, the woman once cast aside by the Duke of Thornvale, had stood before nobles, merchants, and kings as one of the most powerful figures in the realm. And the man who had once humiliated her could barely hold his head above ruin. Duke Alaric Thornvale left the grand hall that night with a storm inside him. Shame, disbelief, and something he hadn't felt in years. Longing. He spent the night pacing in his quarters at the inn, the words forming in his mind but never crossing his lips. He wanted to see her. No, he needed to see her. Not for wealth, not for alliance, but because the sight of her had shattered everything he thought he knew. When dawn broke, he sent a letter sealed with the Thornvale crest. To Lady Isolde of Ravenshire, I humbly request a meeting, not as a duke, but as the man who wronged you. I seek no favor, only forgiveness. Alaric Thornvale. When the letter arrived at Ravenshire's manor, Isolde read it in silence. Her steward waited anxiously for her command. At last, she said, "Prepare the east study. Let him come." By sunset, Alaric arrived. The guards at the gates barely recognized him. The proud duke now wore a cloak worn by travel and humility. He entered the same hall where Isolde had once stood years ago, pregnant and alone. Now, it was filled with light, tapestries, and the scent of jasmine. She awaited him at the far end of the room, seated behind a desk lined with scrolls and ledgers. The wax seal of Ravenshire gleamed beside her. "Your Grace," she greeted coolly, though the title sounded more like courtesy than respect. He bowed deeply. "Lady Isolde." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "You have every reason to despise me. I came not to defend myself, but to say what I should have said long ago. I was blind." Isolde's expression did not change. "Blindness can be cured, Alaric, but arrogance, that's a sickness of the soul." He nodded. "I know, and I've paid for it every day since I left you." Her gaze sharpened. "And now you come to seek forgiveness, or fortune?" He flinched. "Neither. Only peace. And to see the children, if you allow it." At that, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or caution. "You know of them." "I saw them at court," he admitted. "They have your grace, and my eyes." "They have my mother's courage," she corrected gently. "They know of their father only as a man who once walked away, and that is all they need to know." Her voice was calm, but her heart pounded. For years she had imagined this moment, the man who had broken her standing before her, humbled, repentant. And now that it was real, she did not feel triumph. She felt exhaustion. Alaric took a hesitant step forward. "Let me make amends, Isolde. Not to reclaim what I lost, but to protect what's yours, if danger ever comes." She studied him, and for the first time, she saw no deceit in his eyes. Just a man haunted by regret. "Danger comes," she said quietly, "when greed returns." Then, almost reluctantly, she gestured toward the adjoining room. "They're studying with their tutor. You may see them, briefly." Alaric entered slowly, his breath catching when he saw them. A boy and a girl of 6, seated by the window, sunlight touching their auburn hair. They looked up in surprise, innocent curiosity in their faces. "Who is he, Mama?" asked Seraphina, her voice like soft bells. "A friend," Isolde said simply. The boy, Rowan, smiled. "Then he may sit with us." And so he did. For a moment, time ceased. Alaric listened as they spoke about books and lessons, their laughter filling the room with the very sound he had driven away years ago. When the boy showed him a small wooden carving, a hawk, the Ravenshire crest, Alaric nearly broke. He looked at Isolde across the room, tears brimming. She said nothing. When he finally rose to leave, he bowed low to the children and turned to her. "Thank you for allowing me this mercy." "Do not thank me," she said. "Thank them. They are the only reason I could bear to see you again." He nodded, understanding what words could not mend. As he stepped into the carriage, he looked back once more, at the woman who had become everything he had not, and at the children who bore the light of both. And in that single moment, he knew that no title, no power, no wealth could ever compare to what he had once held and lost. 2 months passed after that fateful visit. Duke Alaric Thornvale kept his distance, honoring Isolde's request, yet his heart remained chained to the memory of her eyes, calm, unyielding, merciful, and distant all at once. He poured himself into rebuilding what little remained of Thornvale. He dismissed Lady Celine's wasteful court and her cruel entourage, but his efforts were too late. The duchy was crippled, its lands barren and its people hungry. Celine's fury grew unbearable. "You threw everything away for pity," she screamed one night, hurling a goblet across the room. "You humiliated yourself before her. For what? So she might forgive you." Alaric's patience snapped. "Forgiveness isn't for me, Celine. It's for the ones who suffered because of me." "Then let them starve," she spat. "You were a duke once. You've become nothing." Her words, venomous and true, lingered. For a moment, Alaric realized how blind he had been. The woman beside him wasn't his equal. She was his reflection at his worst. The next morning, he ordered her gone. "You wanted a title, not a home. Take what you can carry and leave." She sneered. "You'll regret this, Alaric. No one abandons me." But he did not answer. The door closed, and with it, ended the last remnant of his old life. In Ravenshire, Isolde's quiet world began to shake. Her ships, which carried trade goods through the southern routes, had gone missing. Pirates, or perhaps rivals, had seized them. 3 captains and their crews were missing, and the crown demanded tribute in their stead. Her steward entered the study in a panic. "My lady, the king blames your ships for the loss of his tribute. He threatens to seize your holdings unless restitution is paid." Isolde's composure faltered for the first time. "How much?" "More than any merchant can pay, but a duke could." She froze. "No." He lowered his eyes. "The Duke of Thornvale sent word. He offers assistance, not for repayment, but protection." Her chest tightened. The thought of owing Alaric anything made her skin burn, yet she could not ignore the truth. Her people depended on her. The fortune her mother left could vanish in weeks if the crown acted rashly. At last, she said, "Tell him to come." When Alaric arrived at Ravenshire once more, he no longer came as a beggar. His clothes were plain, his eyes clear. He bowed deeply. "You asked for help, and I have come. Not as your husband, but as your ally." Isolde studied him, uncertain. "You owe me nothing, Alaric. Why risk your name again?" He met her gaze. "Because this time I understand what it means to protect something worth saving." And so, they stood together once more, not as lovers, but as leaders, as the storm of politics and greed closed in around them. The following weeks tested them both. Ravenshire's enemies, a syndicate of rival merchants led by Lord Haldan of Vera, Celine's uncle, sought to destroy everything Isolde had built. He had financed the pirates who seized her ships, hoping to strip her empire and restore his niece's status. When Isolde learned the name of her enemy, her blood ran cold. "So it always returns to greed," she murmured. Alaric clenched his jaw. "Then let me end it. This is my doing." "You are not responsible for his sins," she said firmly, "but I am responsible for yours," he replied quietly. "You shouldn't have had to face this alone." Together, they rode to the capital to confront Lord Haldon before the royal council. The court expected humiliation, the fallen duke begging the merchant queen. Instead, they saw something different: unity. Isolde entered in emerald and gold, Alaric beside her in a dark doublet bearing both sigils, Thornvale and Ravenshire, entwined. The whispers fell silent. Lord Haldon smirked as they approached. How poetic! The Duchess and her ruinous husband come to plead for mercy. Isolde's voice was calm, cutting. "No, my lord. We come to demand justice." She presented evidence, letters, ledgers, and signed contracts, revealing Haldon's crimes, stolen ships, extortion, and treason. Gasps filled the hall. Alaric stepped forward. "You've spent your life feeding on those weaker than you. I did the same once, but not anymore." The king, impressed by their composure, decreed Haldon's arrest and restored Ravenshire's trade privileges. The pirates were hunted, and every stolen coin was returned. As they left the council, Isolde turned to Alaric. "You saved what I built." He shook his head. "No. You built something I could never destroy again." For the first time, she smiled without bitterness. Peace returned to Ravenshire, but it carried something new: tenderness, cautious and unspoken. Each evening, Alaric stayed a little longer after their meetings, helping her review reports or listening to the laughter of their children echo through the corridors. Rowan idolized him, while Seraphina, sharp and wary, studied him with her mother's guarded eyes. One night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Alaric found Isolde standing before the fire, the children asleep upstairs. "You never remarried," he said quietly. She looked into the flames. "My loyalty was never meant to be traded. Even when my heart broke, it remembered who it belonged to." He stepped closer. "And now?" She turned, her eyes soft yet fierce. "Now it belongs to the woman I became because of you. I can't promise you her forgiveness, but I can offer you her truth." He bowed his head. "That's all I ever wanted." The firelight flickered between them, warm and golden, like the first sunrise after a long winter. From that night forward, he did not press her for affection or absolution. He simply stayed, through storms, through laughter, through quiet. And in time, what had been broken between them began to heal, not through passion, but through patience. The children saw it first. "Mama smiles again," Seraphina whispered to her brother. "I think she forgave him." The years that followed were kind to Ravenshire. What had once been a story of betrayal and disgrace had transformed into a tale whispered across the kingdom. Of power regained, of love reborn, of redemption that arrived not in a single moment, but through time, humility, and devotion. Under Isolde's steady hand and Alaric's renewed loyalty, the combined houses of Ravenshire and Thornvale became a symbol of unity. Their lands flourished. Merchants from distant realms sought their favor. Where once gossip had poisoned their names, now people spoke with reverence of the Duchess who had turned sorrow into strength, and the Duke who had learned to love beyond his pride. Their children, Rowan and Seraphina, grew into the embodiment of both their lineages. Rowan possessed his father's quiet courage and his mother's mind for strategy. Seraphina carried the Duchess's grace and a fierce sense of justice that reminded everyone of her grandmother, the Marchesa Lysandra. Together, they were the heirs to a legacy reborn from ruin. When they turned 18, a grand ceremony was held in the royal court to celebrate their coming of age, and to formally unite the bloodlines of Thornvale and Ravenshire once more. The great hall shimmered with light, filled with nobles and envoys from across the realm. The king himself presided, his voice carrying solemn respect as he declared, "May the sins of the past be buried, and the virtues of this house rise everlasting. Let this union stand as proof that even broken crowns can shine again." The applause that followed was not mere ceremony, it was recognition. The world that once laughed at Isolde now honored her, and those who once followed Alaric out of fear now followed him out of admiration. Later that evening, when the festivities had waned and the torches burned low, Alaric and Isolde slipped away into the castle gardens. It was the same garden where, years ago, she had once walked alone, heavy with child and burdened by exile. Now the air was fragrant with blooming jasmine, and the moon bathed everything in silver light. They walked in silence for a time, until Alaric spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "When I look back on the man I was, I scarcely recognize him. I spent years chasing power, thinking it would fill the emptiness inside me, but what I destroyed in my hunger was the only thing that ever truly made me whole." Isolde stopped and turned to him. Her expression was neither cold nor forgiving, simply human. "And what have you found since then?" He took a deep breath. "That power means nothing if it cannot protect the ones you love. That love means nothing if it cannot endure truth. And that forgiveness is the hardest crown one can wear." She studied him for a long moment. The man before her was no longer the proud, blind duke who had cast her aside. He was older, tempered by loss, and humbled by grace. "You have changed," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You taught me how." For the first time in years, she reached for his hand. It was not an act of surrender, but of acknowledgement, that some wounds were not meant to vanish, but to remind. Their fingers intertwined, and the air seemed to still. The petals from the cherry trees drifted around them like soft snow. The moonlight caught in her hair, and he thought, not for the first time, that perhaps fate had never abandoned them. It had only waited for them to become worthy of what they once shared. "You once told me," Isolde said quietly, "that I brought shame to your name. But it was your shame that gave birth to something greater. Our children will never know the world that broke us. They will inherit the one we rebuilt. And they will remember who taught them to stand," Alaric said. "Their mother, the Duchess who became the heart of the kingdom." She smiled then, faint and luminous. "And their father, the man who finally learned what love is meant to be." The wind whispered through the garden, carrying away the echoes of the past. There was no grandeur in their reconciliation, no sudden confessions or tears, only quiet understanding, the kind that comes when two souls have already walked through fire and emerged whole. When dawn came, the bells of Ravenshire rang once more, not for scandal or mourning, but for life renewed. The chroniclers of the realm would later write that the House of Thornvale had fallen and risen again through its Duchess. Yet those who knew the truth understood. It was not only her will, but his redemption, that forged their legacy. They were remembered not as symbols of betrayal, but as proof that even love broken by pride can be mended by grace. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the towers of Ravenshire, Isolde and Alaric stood side by side, their hands entwined, watching the horizon together. Two hearts that had lost everything and found each other again when the world thought it impossible. For the rest of their days, they ruled not as a duke and duchess seeking power, but as partners in purpose. And the tale of their love became one the kingdom would never forget. Because in the end, it was not vengeance that triumphed. It was forgiveness, the kind that rebuilds empires and heals the human soul. True love is not measured by perfection or permanence, but by the courage to face one's own ruin and rise again beside the one you once broke. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength, the power to turn ashes into legacy.